We continue with highlights of Wisdom for Wealth with Greg Pinio.
Remember this slow dance again? This relationship that started whenever it started, and we've been nurturing it along. There's a reason for that. And that is because, again, our objective, whenever possible, is to involve the seller with the financing. Now, there's some very upfront reasons we want to involve the seller with financing. If I go to the bank, let's take $1 million purchase, and I go to the bank and I say, okay, I want to buy this $1 million building. First of all, the bank is going to say, okay, you need to come up with 30% down. All right. Then we're going to lend you $700,000 at 7% interest. We're going to charge you 2 points to set it up. We're going to collect 2 months of reserves and throw it in an escrow fund. We're going to collect a year's worth of taxes and throw it in an escrow fund. It's going to be their way or the highway. That underlying loan has to meet 1.1 or 1.2 debt coverage ratios. All of these criterion have to be met, and it's their note, their deed of trust, their way or the highway. You want it, this is what you're going to have to do. None of those rules apply when you're dealing with a seller. It's all negotiable. I've bought $1 million buildings for $50,000 down. $950,000 on a note. First year's interest, 4%. Second year's interest, 6%. Third year and thereafter, 7%. No fees to set it up. No prepayment penalties. All of these negotiable terms, are in my control when I'm dealing directly with the seller. When you deal with the bank, it's their way or the highway. Okay? More beneficial, and we're not even there yet, but when you go to sell that property, if you've got an underlying loan on that property, your options are limited. Versus if you have an underlying promissory note, a deed of trust with the seller, the door is wide open to ways you can sell the property that you couldn't elsewhere. So, again, dealing directly with the seller is a key ingredient. I bought a building from a guy once. Actually, it was a 38 unit on Queen Anne, and ran title on this seller to see what else he owned. And he owned about 40 other buildings in Seattle. And after getting to know this guy, after buying that 38 unit from him, I asked him what was the single criterion that he would place on his own acquisition portfolio. And he said, the only rule I ever had for myself is I would never, ever, under any circumstances, use a bank. I would always involve the seller or private investors. I'll give you a clause that in this transaction we're going to write in. And it's something that we've underlined, but I'm going to give it to you so that you've got it one more time. When we're writing up this promissory note with the seller, let's take this $1 million deal. Let's say we put $100,000 down, $900,000 in the form of a note. We've written this note up at 6% interest. Our payments are $4,500 a month or more. We're going to write a clause in there that says this: maker of note has first right of refusal to purchase note should beneficiary elect to sell note prior to maturity. Again, what this means is that if we're paying on this note over 20 years and all outstanding principal is due and payable of the beneficiary in 20 years, what happens if 5 years into it, the beneficiary has a need for cash? It is within his rights to take this note, this very large note, this $900,000 note. At the time, let's say 5 years from now, we owe $850,000. He can take this note and sell it to, anybody in the We Buy Notes department, right? And what he's going to get is he's going to get about 70 cents, 65 cents, maybe 75 cents on the dollar for that note, depending on its collateral and interest rate. If he is going to take that kind of hit in principle, the clause I just gave you says that nobody can buy that note without you first having the right to refuse to buy that note. In other words, if they're going to take that note and go get $500,000 for it, you have the first right to cash him out at $500,000, the first right of refusal. make sure you don't miss that clause in your writing your promissory notes. So, going back to this location, there we are, in the right location. We're in that right location. We're hunting for terms. Terms that fit the buy and hold, terms and price that fit the buy and flip. But there's one other pillar, and that's one that we call expandability. Expandability is the frosting on the cake. The cake is good all by itself. The cake is going to work all by itself. If there were no expandability, the thing would stand on its own all by itself. However, the expandability is the entrepreneurship, the vision, the insight, the perspective that you're seeing something that someone else didn't see. Expandability defined would mean change the picture. Now, let's take our simple buy and flip. We buy a house. The grass is up to about the 4th row of siding. The place hasn't been painted in 16 years. It needs cleaning. It needs some repairs. And we go in and we simply mow the lawn, paint, repair, clean. Boom! It's an entirely different place. That is a very simple form of expandability. A more complicated version of expandability would be to realize that that little house that you just bought is zoned L3, low-rise 3, high-density multiple zoning, that actually this lot that's 8,000 square feet at 800 square feet per unit can house 10 units on it. And guess what? We're not going to waste 1 gallon of Kelly Moore painting this thing. This thing's going down, and a 10 unit is being built where this house used to be. Also, expandability. Okay? Now, what if that house was sitting right up on the front of the property? Could we leave the house and build 9 units in the backyard? Sure. Also, expandability. So expandability is changing the picture to a more profitable picture. It's unlocking the potentials of that property. I'll give you another example. I bought a building down on Lake Union in Seattle. The surrounding area in front to the west, the north, and the south are all houseboats. Houseboats that have no parking, houseboats that have no storage. The first thing I did with this 11 unit that I bought on Lake Union was take this unfinished basement area and I divided it up into 20 storage rooms. 20 storage rooms that rent for $75 a piece and rented the first day I made them available. To who? All of these houseboats that have no storage. This is right in their front porch. Okay? What else don't houseboats have? Parking. So I threw in a security gate, and all of a sudden, where there were no assigned parking spaces in this parking lot, now there's 17 assigned parking spaces for $75 a piece. Expandability, changing the picture, making simple changes that create a greater profit picture. You'll find that the key ingredient to most big expandability is an understanding of zoning. So if you haven't already, you need to march to your city center, DCLU, and get all of the zoning maps and all of the zoning criterion, because that will unlock potentials that that property has. It's the first thing I ask when I'm looking at a bird is, what is the zoning of that particular piece? Because zoning unlocks potential things. If there's a house on a property, it's zoned L1, that automatically means you can turn that basement into a second unit. Whereas if it was zoned single family 5,000, you couldn't. Zoning, understanding, expandability. So terms, location, expandability. Those are the pillars that every transaction that you're contemplating, it needs to stand and measure against those 3 things. Summary. Terms, location, expandability. That's what we have been hunting for. How do we get the phone to ring? I mean, we can drive to the right location, look at an incredibly romantic sixplex built in 1926 and say, oh, God, there it is. That's the one. What do we do from there? See, this gets into philosophy of how do we live deliberately, proactively. And so my suggestion is simply this. Get the name of who owns that building from the title company and write them a letter. Now, you can do this one at a time, or you can do this by the thousands. I personally do it by the thousands. But the bottom line is the same, that you need to be proactive in contacting the seller, saying and expressing your interest in potentially buying their property. Now, when you do that, a lot of things are going to happen. If you choose to go the 1,000 at a time route, I would suggest defining your criterion specifically. 1, send out every multiplex in your romantic location, every 2-unit and up. Okay? In the single-family homes, though, narrow your criterion. Narrow it certainly by tax-assessed value. We're not wanting to send out letters to people whose properties are tax-assessed value at $1 million. Remember, Medina Waterfront? We have no interest in that. We're dealing in Toyotas. And so based on what we're looking for at the end result, we'll determine who we're targeting in our tax-assessed value. Queen Anne, for example, I'm going to send out $300,000 and less tax-assessed value. Okay, in hoping to bring it back on the market in that $400,000 to $450,000 range, the lower 1/3. There's my buy and flip potential in the single family. Now, sure, if I can buy that single family for $200,000 and I can get $2,000 a month rent for it, it becomes a keeper, doesn't it? More than likely, the single family will be buy and flip. The 2 units and up, I send out to everybody because those properties are based less emotionally. They're valued based on their income. Rules of thumb. If a property rents for $4,000 a month, let's say you've got a 6-plex, total gross rents $4,000 a month, you can do some math, and we can get into some complicated math, the income approach to value type math. But for purposes of today, remember that property's got to be worth somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. Rule of 1, $400,000. Add a little bit with low interest rates, maybe up to $500,000 for that property that generates $4,000 a month. Okay? So we're narrowing our criterion. We're being deliberate by sending these people who own these properties a letter stating our interest. Now, how do we send them a letter? Let me suggest that we send it in a white, plain envelope with their address handwritten and your return address handwritten without your name on it. In other words, just your return address, no name, and hand addressed to them white, plain envelope with a real stamp on it. No postcards, no bulk mail, no peel and stick labels, none of that. Hand addressed. Now, it takes some effort, but I guarantee you that as those people go to the mailbox, they get their mail, it all lands right on what I call the mail shelf, which is right up above your belt buckle. As you're going through your mail on your way back to your house, that piece of mail will be pulled out and it will be opened. Because the curiosity factor kicks in. Who is this sending me something in a hand-addressed envelope, white, plain? Who lives at this address? I'm not sure. It'll be the first piece of mail they open. Okay? And as personal as you can make that, the better. You know, if you're married and you have children, you might want to mention you're looking for investment property to send your kids to college. You know, these people have owned this property a long time. Oftentimes are looking for somebody to hand the baton to. You know, coming in there and saying, here's all your cash, get out, that just doesn't quite do it for them. They actually want someone to take it from here that will take care of it, that has a bigger, higher purpose to this thing than just making money. Okay, so you're going to be sending these letters out to people. If you send out 1,000 letters, you're going to get a 3% response. That means you're going to get 30 phone calls. 10 of those phone calls are going to teach you new adjectives and places to put things that you didn't realize you could possibly put things there. 10 of those responses are going to be quizzical. They are just going to wonder what's going on and who are you and what's this about and 10 of those are going to be thankful for a letter, amazing that your timing is so perfect, and are actually considering selling their property. Now, if the 10% that rips you a new one stops you from sending out letters, don't start sending out letters because you will get those 10%. Count on it, all right? It's the 10%, or those 10 calls, I should say, that actually are interested in selling. That's why we do this. So the phone rings, and you've identified that it is somebody who actually wants to sell. At that point, the slow dance begins. Okay? And so you're going to have to match the persona of who's on the end of the phone. They may be down and dirty and let's talk terms and let's get right to it and let's just dive into it. And they may be just wanting to talk and you're going to ask questions, remember. You're just going to have to match the pace and the intensity. If somebody calls you and says, yeah, my name is Bill Bond, let's talk about my property, that's an entirely different call than someone who says, hello, is this Greg? Oh, my name's Alice, and you're going in an entirely different direction with those two people. And so you're going to have to just learn how to handle that. And the key is asking questions. Some of the key questions to ask, we need to know how long they've owned the property. I call these pilot gauges. That's one gauge on your aircraft. How long have they owned the property? Another gauge is obviously their equity position. What do they owe on the property? How much do they owe on the property? Third thing, what are the rents on this property? In other words, a lot of the financial picture is going to unveil itself based on the answers to some of these questions. How long have they been there? If they live in the property, do they own it themselves? Do they have partners in the property? All of these sorts of questions are relevant to structuring your deal. Picture structuring a deal like having a puzzle with all of the pieces face down. The phone rings. Your job now is one at a time to turn the puzzle pieces over face up so that then you can begin solving the puzzle. Okay, so we're watching these pilot gauges and here they come. And all of a sudden we realize that this person is 70 years old. They've owned this building for 30 years. It's been free and clear for the last 20 years. Gauges are starting to move heavy into the green, all of them. At that point, you need to, as smoothly as possible, get face to face. Get off the phone. Gauges are moving correctly. Get off the phone. Set up an appointment with the seller. Where? Of course, at the seller's residence. Boom, you've got your appointment set up. Your next phone call is to pick up the phone, call the title company, get the full property profile on that particular property, and a profile on every other property that particular person owns in the general area. Certainly, they'll own more. Most do. That own multiplexes especially. So get a list of everything. You need to know their portfolio as good as they know their portfolio prior to that meeting, maybe even better. Okay? So that's the next step, and that's where that relationship with the title company comes in. See, it's all about relationships. So we've arrived at our meeting with the seller. We know they've got a great property. We know we're interested, and the dance has begun. That dance may continue for years until the time comes that's right for them to actually write up this property. Make sure that in your list of things to do, once that dance has started, that every couple months you're in touch with these people, you're sending them cards, you're giving them a call, you're letting them know that you're still the buyer of that property and that you're willing to do it on their time frame. Having been face-to-face with hundreds and hundreds of sellers after all of these years of doing this, there are several common threads that come into what a seller might think or say about the terms that you're going to propose in purchasing their property. Again, we would like to involve the seller in the financing of the property, and the seller needs to feel on board with that idea, and oftentimes initially is not. Most sellers have in mind that when it's time to sell, they're going to sell their property, they're going to get a mountain of cash, they're going to be gone, that's it. It's really up to you to be more educated than they are to fill them in on the reality of things. That if they don't have another property in mind that they're purchasing of equal or greater value and are structuring a 1031 tax-deferred exchange as part of the sale, they're going to be hit with huge amounts of capital gains tax. Some sellers have no idea about that. So face-to-face with the seller, we're going to need to be aware of their tax situation should they decide to sell. Most sellers are not up to speed on what their tax obligations look like. You need to be educated enough to know approximately what their tax obligation looks like and have a solution for them via the installment sale that defers, sometimes indefinitely, that capital gains obligation. Another situation sellers find themselves in is they've owned this property for a long time, they're elderly. For the elderly, having a whole bunch of cash in the bank is not often a good thing for them. They haven't really thought that through. But especially if they are in failing health, oftentimes medical benefits don't kick in and start paying out until their liquid cash supply is down to a very minimal amount. Consequently, if they sell this property to you in the form of a promissory note, it becomes a non-liquid asset. And therefore, their insurance benefits are going to be kicked in and cover their costs of their medical care much sooner than if they have this cash in the bank from a sale. All of that's going to be depleted before any insurance benefits kick in. Another question I ask sellers constantly is, okay, if they got all their cash, what are they going to do with it? Oftentimes, their response is simply, well, I just want all my cash, I'm just going to put it in the bank. When I hear that, I hear bank at 1.5%, 2% interest. It seems like a logical comeback for me to say, gosh, wouldn't you like 6% secured by the property that you've known and loved and taken care of? Wouldn't that be a better thing for you rather than money in the bank at 1 or 2%? And so understanding both sides of the equation is what allows you to negotiate in the direction that you're wanting to go. And so again, our objective when I say involve the seller with the financing is that we would like to give the seller a down payment. We would like to give the balance of that sales price in the form of a promissory note. Think of the promissory note as the IOU. It has the amount you owe them, the interest rate, the monthly payment, when this whole thing is due and payable, the maker beneficiary clause, all of that is on the form of the note. The deed of trust is the collateralization agreement. It says that if I don't pay on the note at its terms and conditions, that the collateral for the note is the property. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the subject property. It just has to be a collateral property that is equal to or in excess of the outstanding principal balance of the note. We'll talk about when we start expanding our portfolio, we'll talk about the value of changing the collateral property, having that collateral be a movable entity upon your desire. However, for now, just think of the deed of trust as the collateral for this promissory note. And that is the objective that we have, is involving the seller with the financing with those two instruments. Back to square one, we're in the right location. We're finding this great property. We're buying this property. We're structuring the terms. At that point, we've got a field. We hold the field. It's growing. This corn is growing. When I say corn growing, I mean that our cash flow is growing and our equity is growing. Okay, now when I see $1,000 positive cash flow, what does that say to me? What does that mean? To me, I see $200,000 at 6% interest. Isn't that my payment on $200,000 at 6%? Isn't that $1,000 a month? So as my property grows by $1,000 a month, I don't see $1,000 a month. I see $200,000 because I can go out there in the investment world, borrow $200,000 at 6%, pay $1,000 a month, and I have just harvested the cash flow of this property. Then with that $200,000, what am I doing? Buying another field and plant and let it grow. In the multiplex world, one of the simplest forms of expandability / changing the picture is changing the income structure. Obviously, if we change the income structure to the building, we have changed the value of the building. It's that simple. Okay, and if we want to think in real simple terms, if I change the value, the income stream of a building by $100 a month, at 6% interest, I have just increased the value of the building by $20,000. Okay? Simple. $20,000, 6% interest, $100 a month. So I can go borrow $20,000 and cover the payment of my increased cash flow. So when we change the value, we change the income stream. When we change the income stream, we change the value. They're interchangeable. Now, how many buildings have I purchased where day one, the income stream of the building doesn't even come close to paying for my expenses? That's a pretty risky thing to do. I don't like to do that. I would love that every building I bought, that the purchase price was a function of the current income stream. $6,000 a month, I paid $600,000. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, they can't all work that way, but you would like to start there. Understand, though, that when you change the rents, you run a risk of having a building empty out. Now, I'll give you an example. I bought a 38 unit. I paid $1.4 million for the building. It had an $11,000 a month income stream when I bought it. Okay? I knew that the rents of those 38 units were really low. Now, how do I know that they're really low? I make appointments as if I'm going to rent every single unit on that hill in that area. I simply, on a Saturday, make appointments with 30 different people, go in as if I'm going to rent their apartment and look at it. You want $800 for this, you want $700 for this, and I'm taking notes, copious notes, so that I know what a unit should rent for. So then when I'm looking at a building, I walk in, I look at a rent roll, and here's a unit that's renting for $400 a month. I know it should be $600 a month. Now, I don't just guess that. I know it because I've seen it. All right, so I buy a 38 unit, and I give him the party's over letter. Hi, I'm the new owner. My name's Greg. Your rent is currently $400 a month. 30 days from now, if you'd like to stay on and be my tenant, the new rent is $600 a month. Well, out of that 38 unit, 37 people moved out. But that was to my benefit. I was expecting that. So now I can go into vacant units, clean up the units, paint, carpet, plug switch, lighting, blah, 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 all the cosmetic fix-up. Boom. Now they're all brand new and clean and nice and looking, and then they're full. Then I re-rent them for $600 to $700 a month for those units. I start renting parking. I start putting in my own coin-operated laundry. I start renting storage units. And all of a sudden, 60 days after I buy the building, instead of $11,000 a month, it's $18,750. Well, I just took the building from a value of around $1.4 million to a value of around $1.9 million in 60 days. By changing the rent. Now, $500,000 difference. Did I put $500,000 into the rehab? No, actually I put $75,000 into the rehab. That's a form of expandability. Now, another question you have to ask yourself, am I cut out to do this? It isn't fun for me to go in and tell somebody who's lived in a unit for 30 years that, hi, I'm the new owner, now you're going to pay market rents. I don't enjoy that, but I do that because I'm a real estate investor. Now, if that building is vacant, guess what? The joke's on me, isn't it? I've gotten greedy. So never get greedy, but know your market and don't be afraid of criticism. I'm not a nonprofit. I am a profit company. I'm doing this to make money. So I'm not Habitat for Humanity or any of those other things. You have to decide, are you going to be a charitable or not? Congratulations, you have now purchased some great building in a romantic location, wonderful terms, built for a lifetime. Now you've got to hang on. Remember that great scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where he gets thrown out of the back of the truck and he bullwhips the axle and he just hangs on? Well, that's your job now. That's all you need to do for 20-some years. Hang on. What does it take to hang on? Well, it takes efficient, structured, deliberate management of your asset. You need to go buy this property every other day. You need to keep things tidy. You need to keep things maintained. The quality of the tenants that you get in this building is largely going to be a function of how well you care for the building. Leases have to be written and written carefully. Walk-ins have to be done and done thoroughly. Walk-ins become your roadmap for your walk-out. When you rent a unit, you walk through with that tenant. You make notes of every little item that is in that unit that was pre-existing. That becomes your roadmap for when they leave. And all of a sudden, there's this big burn on the carpet. You simply look at your walk-in, and it wasn't there when you moved in. Therefore, guess who pays for the carpet? They do. You get first and last month's rent up front. Always. Never an exception. You get ample security deposits. You don't rent to smokers. You get plenty of pet deposits if you accept pets. And you charge a key fee, not a deposit, a key fee, because you have to change the locks every time someone moves in. All right? Management is about keeping your thumb on this building every minute of every day. You're watching the building. You're making sure it's efficient. Its systems are efficient. These are the kinds of things that anybody can do if they care. But you have to decide to care. In the Seattle area, it is an obligation of the landlord that when they rent a unit that they have to provide the tenant with a 4-page summary of the landlord-tenant law. This is a 4-page document that actually has a longer version. You should know in and out, left and right, the long version of landlord-tenant law. My lease reads that by the 5th of the month, this rent is due in my office, meaning that if I open the mailbox on the 5th and it's there, great. We have no problems on or before the 5th. If I don't have rent on the 5th, on the morning of the 6th, I don't care if that's Easter Sunday, on the morning of the 6th, you will be issuing a 3-day pay or quit. Again, this is in conformance with your rights as a landlord, but if you don't follow your rights to the letter, you are without any recourse. And so that 3-day pay or quit is issued on the morning of the 6th. For me, if I don't have rent in full, plus the penalties for late fees, plus the 3-day pay or quit charge, by the morning of the 9th, I don't accept rent for that month. At that point, I'm moving towards an unlawful detainer. Their last month's rent is now in effect, and I will have them out by the 30th. There's no leniency. Just the same way that if they bounce a check, never again will I accept a check from them. It has to be cash, money order, or cashier's check. Remember that property management is a function of building location. That if you have a difficult time managing property, it's because you chose a location that has a tenant base that is high maintenance. Try to focus on locations that are established, calm, professional, romantic, whereby the property management there is kept very calm and professional. Stay out of university towns and university locations within a town because it's very hard on the property, high turnover, day in and day out you'll be there maintaining it. Stay in more established neighborhoods, more established professional areas, and you'll avoid 90% of the management problems you could have. One of the important things, especially in a larger building, is that as you're writing leases on that building, that you stagger the day leases come due. In other words, you don't want to have all your leases on a 38-unit building coming due April 1st. What if you piss off the wrong tenant and they start a little coup and all of a sudden the entire building empties out by virtue of their ability on April 1st? Have 10% of your leases come due every month of the year or thereabouts so that there's never a possibility once you own the building that the whole thing can empty out at once. One of the joys I get, the payoff for my persistence, as it were, is at the end of each year I drag out the amortization schedule out of the file for that particular property, and I enter the new outstanding principal balance in my line item on an Excel spreadsheet, where January of the first year I owe $900,000. By the end of the year I might owe $890,000. And I look at that and I go, there's $10,000 I made this year for picking up kitty litter around the dumpster. So you'll enjoy that, as I do, watching the principal balance decline on these properties and at the same time watching the value of these properties go up. At the end of the road, you've been at this now for many, many years. And if you have done it right, if you have lived deliberately, proactively, looked at every opportunity and found a handful of good ones that you've capitalized on, at the end of this whole thing, you're going to want to start thinking in terms of, how do I get out of this? How do I sell, and how do I sell intelligently? Well, obviously, you're going to have a big capital gains issue to deal with. Just like many of the sellers that you purchased from, that was an issue to them. And all I can tell you is that the two options, at least currently, at our disposal, are to buy equal or greater value or to sell on an installment sale. Two thoughts come to me. I don't think there's any right answer here. But one is that multiplexes tend to be very intense management animals. Just by their nature, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that can and oftentimes do go wrong. But for you and I, they're what we could do. They're what we could get into, and they have gotten us there. Thank God we did them. We may want to explore a 1031 option to get into some other form of real estate that is less management intensive. Now, in the very saying of that, I get a little bit nervous, because what's got us here is that what we own is necessary. It's right up there with food and air. Okay? Office buildings, retail space, those sorts of things, less management intensive, much higher risk. And what I'd hate to see happen is that all of your hard work up till now all of a sudden gets hit with a 30,000 square foot vacant office building. That's not going to do anybody any good. My preference in how to exit this strategy is A, die with it, B, sell everything I have on an installment sale the exact way that I purchased it. Get a minimum amount down, write the deal up of interest-only payments on the outstanding principal. I don't want any principal. I want interest-only payments. I'll pay tax on the interest income, but never do we have to visit the capital gains because I'm not receiving any principal gain. And I'm going to write huge prepayment penalties into my sales so that if you try to pay me off early, you're going to pay me 30% additional principal. Why? To cover my tax obligation when I receive that principal. Let me tell you a story of Plain Jane, right? Very close friend of mine. Over her life, she worked for the federal government, the Department of Social Security, for 32 years. Every day. Never missed a day. Okay? And after the end of 32 years, she has a $2,000 a month retirement income for 32 years of work. Along the way, she bought one house and one sixplex. Bought the house, let it grow for a few years, refinanced the house to pull out some equity to buy a sixplex. You add 17 years to that equation, the house and the sixplex, and Jane is well over a millionaire because of those two properties. $5,000 a month income being generated endlessly out of those two entities versus 32 years, never missing a day, creating a $2,000 a month retirement. 32 years, did that make her a millionaire? No, that hardly allows her to pay rent, gas, and reasonable medical insurance. Two properties along that road have made her a millionaire, and she can retire not just with dignity, but with style. I feel like I'm giving people the tools, the philosophy, the motivation perhaps to some. We can do so much more than we think we can. I think that people need to be inspired with the passion within themselves. What do you love? What do you live for? What is it that you would do all day long if you weren't paid a cent for? I'm not taking people from their careers and saying, go be real estate agents. Hell, I wouldn't list a property if you gave it to me. That sounds like hell. However, investing in an asset that is going to send your kids to college, that's going to provide a retirement for you, that's going to allow you that bass boat that you never could have got otherwise, this is where this path can lead to things and experiences and moments that never would have been had you not had some financial resource to put those things in motion. They say that less than 5% of adults spend money on educating themselves after their college years. You should be congratulated because you've been one of those people who has cared enough about where you're going, about your future. Maybe it's your children's future. The bottom is you give a damn enough to try to keep learning more and try to better your life. You've just attended Wisdom for Wealth. It's an overview of what we're trying to do in the acquisition world of real estate. But you can probably tell that what you've learned now is just a doormat to the house before you. That terms and the understanding of the intimate workings of terms is an endless study. We do our best in the second day seminar that we call Foundations for Freedom to go into the intimate workings of terms in a real estate purchase and sale agreement, all of the available tools at your disposal to help your odds along in actually acquiring property. Not every deal you're going to do is as easy as a free and clear building, X down, X on a note, all's happy, life forevermore. Some deals are there for the taking, but you need to understand how to run the skill saw to cut the board. And this is what we go into in that second seminar. I appreciate your spending time with me on the first day and the first seminar, and even buying this CD to review what we talked about on day one. I really look forward to your presence on the second seminar at Foundations for Freedom, where we can get into the nuts and bolts and inner workings, what we would call terms to the fourth power, Foundations for Freedom. You know, I have been at this sport for a long, long time. I could do what I just did in the last X amount of hours in my sleep because I've done it so many times. The reason that I get up and the reason that I show up at these things is for people like me who 30 years ago, there were no options. I knew how to build a deck. I knew how to frame. I was a simple guy, but I had bigger dreams. real estate has been a door that has opened for me. The understanding of it has allowed me to do things and experience things that I never thought I could. More than that, it's allowed me to see myself in ways that I would like you to see yourself. We are more capable than we think we are. We're smarter and more able than we give ourselves credit for. The bar that we thought was way too high, actually, we can get over that bar and we can raise it for those around us, for our friends, for our families, for our children. I want to give the bar for my children something that they believe that they can reach anything. Anything. And that's really why I'm here. That's really what gives me a lot of joy, is to try to give somebody not only the tools, but the confidence that says, I can do this. And then at the end of the day, when I get that call and that bird is tied up and it's in the cage and life has just changed because options are now available that weren't there before, that's when quietly I just smile and I realize that what has been given to me in this world is now going back, and that makes me feel good.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom for Wealth with Greg Pinio. For more information on this and other Reach Returns productions, please contact us at reachreturns.com or call Reach Returns at 206-550-4242. The information on these discs is copyrighted 2003, all rights reserved.